Mastery, to me, level 10 living, is the science of distinctions. The Chinese have a saying, that you can see up there. The beginning of wisdom is to call things by their right name. In other words do have meanings. If you ever notice something, that people have mastery in any subject, are able to make greater distinctions in the language that they use. So, for instance, a general practitioner would have an eyes, nose, and throats kind of analysis, but a brain surgeon or a neurosurgeon is going to have a greater refinement. Anytime you get into a field that has mastery, you'll see the people that model mastery have had, according to Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 hours of immersion practicing something before something came together and they stepped into a genius capacity over it, which means this: lots of experience creates the ability to make better and better distinctions, which means you have to have a philosophy that risks a lot of failure. Why? Because in order to have a lot of experiences, you're going to have to trust the fact that you're not always going to know what you're doing. The genius is in learning from the experience rather than trying to figure out what you've got to do before the experience happens. How many of you are already learning things after you're experiencing it or while you're experiencing that you never could have academically learned before you went into the experience? Take a look around. So the experience says that distinctions are there. Now here's the great news. 30 years of research I've been studying from a university on the field of destiny. And these things I'm talking about right now are all distinctions that the masters make. They're not the general stuff. They're slicing. It's like a delicatessen slicer. Slices the meat real thin. And so what we want to do is we want to take thin slices of this subject of destiny and you stepping into a greater degree of intuition. In fact, I think within 45 minutes now, we can actually maybe double your intuitive capacity just by having some experiences that you can do. We could double your ability to create an environment that's conducive to attracting what you want if you knew how to put yourself into a state that influenced the environment. So instead of being moved on by circumstances, you actually shape the environment to move where you want to go. Fair enough? All right, so let's get into the science of this field. And here's the level 10 picture I use. You've got inside of you dreams and desires, hopes, aspirations. In fact, what Steve talks about corresponds with all the research I've seen. 30 years worth of data on the subject has created a new language, that this place where your future comes together, and we'll put a crown there, this place where your future comes together, where your gifts, your talents, your passion comes into alignment with an opportunity. And where that happens, you hit a zone called the convergence zone. So level 10 living, which is living in a state of actualization, is really entering into a thing called convergence. The convergence zone is when all that you've gone through in your life to prepare you intersects a moment of opportunity where the better you shows up at the intersection. And when you show up in life's opportunity and you're in the being state of mastery in terms of working on you, you actually energize the opportunity and produce a result that no one else can produce like you, and as a result, promotion starts to happen. Convergence is when you step into a role that uses 100% of your skills, knowledge, ability, and your core personality in an assignment that is uniquely designed for you. It's almost like, and this is where my faith comes in, it's almost like when you get into the subject of destiny, or as Steve would call it, the science of the area of destiny. What's happening is you're stepping into something that existed before you got there. Or you might say this: for most of you, it's not about creating the future; it's about discerning the future you are uniquely gifted to manifest. And having said that, this isn't just some kind of pseudoscience. Let me say it again. A lot of people approach destiny as though, or their future as though it's a series of goals and steps and achievements. Well, that's one sense. But in a greater sense, what if you were created for a purpose? What if your existence isn't an accident of nature, but a product of design? What if you're designed to do something, and when you're in the presence of that something, something inside of you comes alive. You just don't know how to connect with it. So when Jonas Salk, for instance, is the inventor of the polio vaccine, he is searching on solutions to polio, and he discovers the solution in a path that all the conventional scientists weren't on, which opens up an interesting concept, that creativity and intuition and destiny are somehow all tied together. You intuit something wants to show up. And I'm telling you that there is something that does want to show up in your life, and it's in the dreams you've had, the passion you've had, the hopes you've had almost like previews of that something in your past. But when you come into the convergence zone, something happens. Jonas Salk said it was as though he could see what had to manifest. And what he was looking for was actually looking for him. Which makes an interesting idea. When he discovers the vaccine, the language he used was, it was as though a future was seeking to become manifest. Which opens up the idea that maybe there are purposes for your life that are wanting you. Maybe there's things you do, people you touch, accomplishments you have, and maybe they're not celebrated in a global sense because not everything that everyone knows about is necessarily always significant. But it's significant in the grand scheme of things, and when you do that level 10 thing, you're 100% alive. There's a future. Catch this. There's a future, Jonas said, seeking to manifest. Who else had this experience? Bill Gates, one of Steve Jobs' partners. Bill Gates, in the second year at Harvard, had the impression, the concept, you could say the vision of Microsoft and where future technology was going. How did he get it? He intuited it. But he intuited it because he had the gifts to make it manifest. Here's the interesting thing about intuition. You don't intuit something that doesn't correspond to a capacity to make it manifest. In other words, if you've got a dream or a vision, and it's something which is repetitive, constant, coming up for you, you may not know how to make it happen, you may not be in the place to make it happen, but there's something about that repeated desire that calls for something in the future that is going to be the fulfillment of that desire. Bill Gates drops out of college, second year at Harvard, for one reason. He was afraid that if he could see it that clearly, anyone could see it that clearly. Have you ever had an idea and you don't act on it and somebody else acts on the idea? I mean, this is kind of like an interesting study. So if you don't act on the ideas that you've got, it's like the ideas in the atmosphere. Then somebody else does it, and then you kick yourself because they're doing something that you saw. So Gates sees Microsoft. Jonas Salk sees a vaccine that hasn't ever been manifest yet. I could tell you illustration after illustration of individuals who saw something in the future and it became the essence of what drove them as an entrepreneur, an inventor, a creator, an author, a writer, a filmmaker. They just didn't have the manifestation of it. So what are these two levels here? What would these two be? I would like to know what they are. Well, this level right here, you think it's important to know what those two are? Well, because if you're living at a level 5-5, here's the problem. You're leaving a lot of destiny on the table. Do you believe it's possible that if you don't play full out, what would be the number one reason why you wouldn't play full out? What's the word? Fear, right? So fear can actually cause you to edit what you're willing to risk. The people that actually risk and see the payoff are the people who push past the fear and they move on into another zone. This territory here is the territory of what might have been, could have been. This is the money that could have been made. This is the relationships that could have been experienced. This is the technology that might have been birthed. All of these things lie in the realm of what's possible. So I would want to know what those two levels are, and I'll tell you what they are right now because you guys are ready, right? The heart of the samurai, what beats on the inside is passion. What Steve said was he pursued the passion and trusted that the dots would connect. You can't see it going forward, you can only see it going backwards. The other interesting thing is that when you have this vision of something that's in your future that you want to manifest, if you don't sustain the emotional motivation to pursue it, then at some point your fears or your willingness to settle for less will cause you to park yourself somewhere in that 1 to 10 continuum. The one thing about actualized people is they're 100% alive. In any actualized moment, if we wrote it down, the common denominator for you, whether it was getting an award in high school or scoring a touchdown, or it might have been a moment where you're not even athletic, but you did something athletic. There's a theme and a thread in all of those actualized moments, and one of them is you were fully engaged when it happened. You weren't texting anyone. You weren't on the cell phone. You were smitten and involved with that which you were experiencing. You were in the passion zone. You were in 100% motivation at that moment. You were in an undistracted, total, what we would call an athlete, the athletic sense, total engagement. Make sense? Make sense? So what's the word there? Passion. Can you say it with passion? So what happens when you give more physical energy, more investment of energy? And this is the genius of what Tony Robbins tapped into with all of his training. It's that your physiology, the way you move, the way that you engage physically, has everything to do with momentum because emotion creates motion. So people that are bottled up emotionally constipated at some level, where they can't laugh, they can't connect, they can't be silly, they can't be foolish, they can't risk being 100% out there, emotionally invested in the experience. What they do is they play small, so they end up experiencing small. So one of the things which I want you to catch all through the experience here with Clemmer is that your physical, emotional level of engagement determines the payoff you get. And so for that reason, you have to be fairly strong physically in order to deliver on the destiny you've got. The second characteristic here has to do with competence. Competence, and that's an interesting word. It really comes down to what are you gifted to do most or what are you gifted to do best? Your level of competence, your level of passion. I saw Think and Grow Rich out there as one of the books that was recommended. It's amazing how if it's really a science, then it's probably repeated 100 times already. What Napoleon Hill called this was definiteness of purpose backed by a burning desire. You see, your competencies and your giftings tell you how you go about fulfilling a purpose. Your passion moves you towards what it is that you're uniquely called to do. So how do we navigate from here to there? Because I don't want to live at a 5-5. I want to live at a 10-10. Now here's the amazing thing. Life will put you in 5-5 situations in order to build your competence or expand your emotional commitment. That's why those of you that are engaged in network marketing, you want to understand the genius of that profession. That the profession itself forces you to address your own constraints. It's one of the few industries in the world where what you make is a direct reflection of your mastery of what you do. It's not driven by other people, other economic factors, because there's always somebody who is making out well with other people who are struggling. So you want to look at what are the core competencies or giftings that you need to develop to play the game at a level 10, and how do you sustain commitment? Because all mastery happens. I don't want to get too far into the subject. All mastery happens in stages. What does that mean? It means that you very seldom just say, oh, I love to do this, and boom, show up an expert. Usually it's, I love to do this, and then you have to risk the growth experience of mastering the fundamentals that makes that thing happen. So real growth happens not in a direct beeline, like some kind of a boom like that, but here's how real growth happens. It happens in stages. And squeaks. Do you know where people fall off the wagon? On the plateau. Once you hit a level, life has a way of forcing you to consolidate your mastery at that level so that you become the embodiment of what that is.